In this video, I'm going to go over how bundlers like Webpack and Rollup are used in the single SPA recommended setup. We're going to ask, do we have to use a bundler like Webpack? How much Webpack are we going to have to learn in order to do single SPA System.js in the recommended setup? We're going to compare bundlers to System.js, and then we're going to write a Webpack config from scratch to create a single SPA application. So first off is, do we have to use a bundler? And the answer is no, you do not have to use a bundler. If you are starting a project from scratch, I'd recommend that you use a bundler like Webpack. However, if you have an existing code base that maybe uses a different build tool like Gulp, then you do not need to use Webpack in order to get things working with single SPA in the recommended setup. I'll show quickly how you can pull that off. So notice right now we are exporting the single SPA lifecycles from this colors.js file. If you have a build tool like Gulp, you're not going to be able to export this and expect it to get into System.js and then get into single SPA and then mount. That is not going to be very easy. So what you can do instead is you can actually just create a global variable for your single SPA application. After you create the global variable, you can then just register that global variable as a single SPA application. So this is something I recommend when you're getting started with an existing code base that doesn't use Webpack, is just use a global variable. However, in the majority of cases, you are going to be using a bundler like Webpack, and those are the cases that we're going to talk about in the rest of the video. So the next question is, of course, how much Webpack am I going to have to learn? Webpack configurations can sometimes be rather nasty, and it can get sort of complicated. And so it's a fair question to ask, how much am I going to have to learn? The answer is, you're not going to have to learn a ton. You will have to learn a few things if you're the first person setting this up at your organization. However, Vue CLI, Angular CLI, and then create single SPA all will create and then even tweak the Webpack config properly for you to have it all set up to go with single SPA. So with Angular, you use single SPA Angular, which will modify your Webpack a little bit for you to make it easier to use with single SPA. With Vue, you use Vue CLI plugin single SPA, which will do the same. It will modify your Webpack config for you. And with React, you can use create single SPA, which will create a React application that already has a Webpack config that is working as a single SPA application. And so just like to get the very minimum going, you do not have to learn a whole bunch of Webpack. Where you will have to learn some Webpack is converting an existing Webpack config into something that can be usable by single SPA. And that often can be one of the hardest parts of migrating your existing code bases to single SPA. So what we're going to do later on in this video is we're going to write a Webpack config from scratch, and in that we'll go over each part of it and why it's important for single SPA, if it is important for single SPA, so that you know what modifications do I need to make to my existing Webpack config so that it will work as a single SPA application. Okay, one last thing to go over before we do that though. We need to talk about System.js a little bit. So first off, there are a couple other videos I have created that talk about in-browser JavaScript modules versus build time modules, and about System.js. So those videos might be good to check out first, as they explain some of the key concepts here. But what we are trying to accomplish here is we are trying to turn this project, which right now only has one file, colors.js, but could have many files as the project gets bigger. We're trying to turn this entire project into one JavaScript module, one in-browser JavaScript module And that in-browser JavaScript module will then be downloaded by System.js. So the difference between System.js and Webpack is that System.js is all about modules in the browser, and Webpack is all about modules in your node modules, so at build time instead of in the browser. So whenever we're talking about all of the modules going on in the browser, so like system.import something, that's very clearly System.js. However, when we're talking about npm installing or yarn installing a new library and then putting that inside of our bundle, that is going to be Webpack. Okay, let's dive into how do we create a Webpack config for an in-browser JavaScript module that is usable by System.js and also can be used by SingleSpa as a SingleSpa application. So you can see we've got this code already written. So this is the SingleSpa portion of the code. And this file, colors.js, is known as the entry file or the main file. So the entry file is where the bundler starts, and the important thing about the entry file is that anything that you export from this entry file will be made available to System.js and to SingleSpa. Anything you export from any other file will not be made available to System.js and SingleSpa. So really it's only this file that matters when we're talking about what is the API for our in-browser module, or how do we get the life cycles into SingleSpa? The answer is you have to find your entry file and then make sure that you're exporting the life cycles correctly. Okay, here we are, a blank file. One thing I'd like to note as we start getting into this Webpack config is that usually you aren't going to need to write a Webpack config completely from scratch. Usually, you already have one, either through Create React App or Angular CLI or Vue CLI, and they've already put together a Webpack config for you. So what I'm going to show here is not what you're going to have to do when you're creating a SingleSpa application, but rather we're just going to go over it from scratch so that you can see every piece of it. Your job is actually just going to be modifying what you already have to look more like this. And that's really what you're going to have to do to your code in order to make it workable as a System.js module and a SingleSpa application. So the first thing is that we have to have an entry file. And this can actually often be one of the trickiest parts of migrating an existing Webpack config to use SingleSpa. So I'd recommend only having one entry point, and even having that one entry point be unnamed or anonymous. Let me show you what I mean by only one and anonymous. So you can also have an array. Webpack allows this. So we could have source colors, source planets.js, source elements.js. At this point, now there are 3 entry files, and so which one of them is going to be the one that System.js looks for the exports? Ultimately, this is turning into a single JavaScript module that is in the browser. So if we have 3 entry files, which of the 3 entry files will be the one that turns into the module? It's best usually just to have one. Not impossible to have more, but best usually just to have one. Also, a common thing that you'll see is a named one. So we'll do like colors is that, and then things is source things. So this is something that is also common. This is similar to the array, except now we've given a name to each thing that's in the array. And this is also something that I'd recommend not doing if you can get away with it in your Webpack config. Because once again, we're trying to turn a single entry file into a single in-browser JavaScript module. Okay. Next up, we've got the output. So the output is saying, where do we want the file that is created by Webpack to be placed? And it also configures what kind of output file do we want. So I usually go with the system library target. So library target changes the output format for the bundle. And by default, it's not going to work with System.js. But if you change it to library target, it will work with System.js. Alternatively, you can use UMD or AMD as library targets, and those will work as well. And even, you could play around with some of the other library targets as well, but I'd recommend using the System.js format. There's another thing called library in the output where you can give the library a name. This is actually, you don't need it, and I'd actually recommend not doing it. So we could name our library colors. However, this requires extra configuration of System.js doing this. And so I don't do it, and it is not needed. System.js already knows the name of your module because it's in the import map. Okay, next thing, I like having a source map here. This is not important for single spot or anything, it's just something I like. And this is actually, we're really, really close here. Let's actually pause here. We're going to see if this works. There are a couple things that we're going to have to add in later, but let's first see the problem in the browser, and then we'll fix it by changing the Webpack config. Okay. So to run Webpack, I'm going to have a script in my package.json. One of them is going to be a build script. One of them is going to be a start script. Sometimes the start script is called serve. Okay. I guess, there is one thing we're missing from our Webpack config. That's a mode. So I'll do production for our mode. And then over here I'll do mode equals development. So when we're running it as a server, we want it to be compiled in development mode, and then when we are building it for production, we want it to be in production mode. Okay. So let's try yarn build. Okay. I did not remember the output perfectly. Let's try it again. Here it is. Yep. Okay. So the error that we're getting here is it's saying you've got a weird syntax in here. This looks like some JSX, and you haven't told Webpack to do JSX. So for that, we're going to use Babel to solve that. TypeScript can also work, or other compilers. Sometimes you don't even need Babel or TypeScript, but in this case we do, because we do have some React and JSX going on. So the module rules section defines how do you handle certain files. And what I'm going to say is any file that ends with the .js extension, I want Babel to process it. I do not want my node modules to be processed by Babel because they already have been by the person who maintains those projects. And then we're going to say use Babel loader. Okay, I've already configured Babel to understand JSX and React. So here we go. We've told Webpack all JavaScript files need to go through Babel first. Let's see if that worked. Okay. So this file that we're looking at is the file that was created by Webpack. It has React in it, and it has our colors.js file in it. You probably haven't looked at many minified files like this. It's sort of ugly, right? I do want to look at one part of it, though, just the very, very first part. Notice it's calling system.register. This is what the library target system did to our bundle, is now it is calling system.register. And as you might be able to guess, system.register is important for it to be understood by System.js. So we're on the right track here. Okay, now let's see if we can start up Webpack dev server. Okay, and it created a main.js. I'm actually going to change this to be colors.js over here. Okay. So we're building colors.js. Now, what I'm going to do now is, let's see if this works with System.js. Let's try it out. So there's a website called singlespaplayground.org, and it has System.js already loaded up in the browser. I use this, and it's linked to in the documentation, so it's a way of just testing out, can I load up my thing with System.js and have it work? Okay, so all that we're going to do here is say system.import. We need to figure out the URL for this file. So it's localhost 8080 colors.js. Let's see if we can load it over here. Here it is. So we're going to try to load this file into this tab. So we're going to copy this. If you're in Firefox, you can even do top level await right now. Chrome has a bug, I think, in the browser console with top level await. I'm sure they'll fix it soon. So by the time you watch this video, maybe they'll have it fixed. So yeah, here's the first problem that we're seeing. We're saying we can't load this because it's actually on a different domain, cores. I've got in trouble with cores. So because we're only running Webpack dev server locally, we're not using it for production, there aren't a huge amount of security concerns about opening up all cores requests to our local host in this case. So what we can do is add a dev server block and then say we need to add some extra response headers, HTTP response headers from our Webpack dev server. Okay. So now we're going to say access control out origin is the one that makes cores work. We're going to say let any domain make any request to our server. So let's refresh the page and try again. It didn't work. You have to restart your Webpack dev server when you change the Webpack config. Here we are. So the first part worked. These yellow warnings that are popping up are annoying, and we're going to solve those too. But the first part worked. So we're seeing this bootstrap mount and unmount. And so now that we're in a place where this will actually like load up in System.js and single spa and work. To show that to you, so Single Spa Playground has a little feature called Instant Test. Let's see. Let's see if I can do it. Yeah, so, okay. What's happening here, I guess, were we before on HTTP and now we're on HTTPS? Is that what was happening? I'm not 100% sure. Let's go back to where we were. So if you're on HTTP, which I'm not sure if Firefox will even let me, yeah, if we're on HTTP, then now this got sort of weird here. Okay, we're not going to do the instant test. It does work. I have used it many times, but for the sake of this video continuing on, we're not going to use it right now. In fact, I'm going to have to do one thing to make sure that these errors go away. Okay. Let's go back to where we were. Here we are. So yeah, now we're getting the warnings, and now it's red even, getting this invalid host origin header. So let's solve this problem. What's happening here is that Webpack dev server tries to set up WebSocket, or it tries to set up HTTP polling in order to get a push notification whenever you save a file and recompile, and then reload the page once that happens. And in order to do that, it has to make a lot of requests to localhost. And we're failing some host checks. So you disable host check. Once again, this is only being used on your local host. It's not something that will be used in production. So we're not like just getting rid of important security things here for your production application. But once we refresh, now we can even see that we've got Webpack dev server saying that live reloading is enabled. Okay, so this Webpack config here, this 27 lines, is really all that you need in order to get a single spot application working. The library target is super important, the entry is super important, and then you probably will need some dev server stuff. In the remaining parts of this video, I'm going to go over a couple more things that you might run into when you're modifying your Webpack config that we haven't seen yet. So one of them is that we were earlier seeing the yellow and red warnings on a loop in here. So you might need to set a sock host and a sock port in here. You can go look these up on webpack.js.org to understand them better. But this instructs Webpack dev server, where do I make a request to initiate this push notification WebSocket stuff? Remember, the WebSocket stuff is only so that the page automatically reloads when you save the changes. There's nothing more to it than that. But it can be rather annoying if you've got a yellow and red screen just on loop, popping things up. And it can be nice to have the live reloading going. So you'll sometimes need this. Another thing is often you'll see in Webpack config an optimizations part. And this optimizations part can actually mess things up when we're trying to load your bundle as a System.js module. So the reason why it messes it up, the optimizations bundle is a way of controlling how Webpack splits all your files into output bundles. So notice when I run Webpack here, it outputs one file that's 133 kilobytes. The optimizations block gives you a chance to split up this colors.js into multiple files. The problem with using it like that is that now which one of those files is the entry file and which one should be downloaded by system.js, and then will the other ones also be downloaded? Sometimes it assumes that you're injecting script tags into the HTML file with index.html plugin. So it can be rather tricky. So by deleting optimizations, you're not actually making your build less optimal. The only thing that you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to choose how to do code splitting in a different way. So if we go to the Webpack documentation and go to their code splitting section, they talk about 2 different ways of doing code splitting. With a single SPA application, I'd recommend one particular way, and that way does not use the optimizations block. In fact, I think it would be worthwhile to open that up. Okay, so you can have multiple entry points. You can have optimization split chunk stuff, and you can have dynamic imports. So I really would recommend doing dynamic imports when you're doing single SPA and you're trying to create a single in-browser module for this entire project. With dynamic import, you can still get multiple output bundles, and they'll be fully optimized, and yet it will still work. It'll still work with system.js. Additionally, if your project gets big enough, Webpack, meaning if you install enough libraries or you write enough code, Webpack will start doing some stuff by default to split it up. It will create like vendors chunks and stuff like that. So there are approaches to doing code splits, dynamic imports, and some of the Webpack default stuff that will make your bundle performant, and you are not sacrificing performance when you delete this optimizations block. You simply aren't. Okay, so that's one thing that you're going to have to think about. Another thing, and this one's pretty important, and I think that this is the last one I'm going to go over in this video, is the public path. So the public path with Webpack is something that applies only to Webpack. So if you're doing Rollup, I guess there are similar concepts in Rollup, but you don't have to think about this, whereas in Webpack you do have to think about this. The public path, it tells Webpack where do I download all of my code splits from. And so because with a single SPA application, we might have one application on one server and then the HTML file on a different server, or even if they're on the same server but they're just at different paths, Webpack can start getting confused about where do I download the rest of my code splits. So the easiest way to not have to worry about that is you install a library called system.js Webpack interop. Then you create a file called setPublicPath. This is all in the documentation for system.js Webpack interop. And then you give it the name of your system.js module here. So this is the name of the system.js module. So the name is usually something like your org and then the project name. It can be anything. Really, it's whatever is in the import map. In our test environment over here, I haven't even really changed the import map yet. Let me do that right now. So I'm going to say colors is at this URL. Okay. Let's refresh, and we can do now instead of putting in the full URL, we can say colors here. Now, okay, so something I did is making it so that it no longer worked. It's saying that So cores isn't working anymore over here. Oh, it's because I killed the server. Let's start it back up. Okay, here we are. So you just have to do this public path thing. Go look up the documentation for System.js Webpack interop. That will make it better. And this will dynamically set the public path. In the Webpack documentation, it calls it setting it on the fly. Okay. There is one very last thing I'm going to show here in the Webpack config. And that is, right now I'm on HTTP, but if I switch over to HTTPS, then things will start being broken. Let's go here. Yeah, so it's failing to download the colors application. So to make it work, you can do HTTPS true and then restart. What this will do is Webpack will generate an SSL certificate to use for this project. The SSL certificate will not be trusted by your browser. In Chrome, you can actually just tell Chrome to always trust certificates on localhost. There's a flag for that in your settings. In Firefox and other browsers, you cannot. So you can tell Webpack Dev Server to reuse a certificate that you have generated that is trusted by your operating system, or you can just give a one-off exception to this SSL certificate every time that it starts up. Let me show you what I mean. So it still failed to download, but if we go here, we're getting a security thing. This is an SSL problem. This is because the SSL certificate is not trusted. But I just gave an exception. I told Firefox to ignore the SSL certificate problem for this cert on this URL. So now if we refresh the page and try again, here we are. And we'll even see the hello world that we've got going is now working. If we change this, it will automatically reload the page, and then we've got hello world 2. Okay. So there you go. There is how to set up a Webpack config. I did not go over Rollup. Rollup has some similar concepts that apply, but I thought I would go over Webpack since that one's more popular. And once again, I'd just say your job is not to write this Webpack config from scratch. Usually what your job instead is to take an existing Webpack config and then make sure that it has the proper things to make it work. Specifically the library target and the entry, get rid of the optimizations block. Use dynamic import instead for your lazy loading. But yeah, that's it. I hope you find this helpful.